Welcome to the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. Brought to you by Blue Sky Business Consulting. We discuss 5 questions in about 15 minutes.
Thanks again for joining us, everyone. We're always glad that you take some time each week to join us for the Team Engagement Podcast. And I'm excited to welcome our guest today. He is from Denver, Colorado. This is Peter Melby. He is the founder and CRO of New Charter Technologies. Peter, thank you for taking some time with me on a busy day, of course. What would you like the audience to know about New Charter Technologies?
Hey, Sean. Thanks for having me on. So New Charter Technologies is a newer entity, but with a history that dates back quite a ways. So we're on a mission to create the IT services company that hasn't existed yet in the IT industry, and our focus is generally around building people operations at scale. So we find best-in-class IT service providers, including Greystone Technology, which I co-founded in Denver over 20 years ago. And we have a shared investment, platform where we bring these companies in and we work together to take best-in-class operations and make a better than best in class, aggregate, in terms of a nationwide presence and nationwide opportunities. So, being able to have both the focus on people, but also doing it with 1,000 employees and thousands of customers, which is challenging for IT, because most IT organizations are pretty boutique, and pretty small, because it's such a relationship-oriented business. So that relationship-oriented business at scale is what we're succeeding at, and it's a lot of fun, but it also brings a lot of interesting challenges, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, that does lead into the questions, but yeah, that is an interesting challenge, because you're right. A lot of IT firms out there, they're just kind of localized, and that's great. They can address the local needs. There's no problem, but I like what you're doing, and I like that you're bringing the people element as well. So fantastic, good work. All right, well, let's jump to the questions then. So as you were kind of indicating, Peter, as you've been building the business and growing the business, is there a challenge that you've overcome that you're especially proud of?
Yeah, there's one that was especially impactful for us from the early stages, and probably the best way I can explain it is we overcame the expectation that good intentions, as we interacted with our people, would be enough. That people would always perceive those intentions. I started out with the idea that I want to be a people-oriented operation. I care about people, and they're going to see that because it's true of me. What I learned very quickly is that when we got beyond 10 people, it was very hard for them to see all of that, for one, and know me, but also that there's some inherent distrust that happens just in the fabric, of the leadership dynamic, trust of authority, things like that. And so we learned that just having good intentions is not enough. It had to actually become a methodical practice, and that's a really different thing when you look at how do you create practice around the ideas of just, I want people to trust me and believe what I say. And so that's been the journey that's probably been the most effective for us as we move forward, in terms of it hasn't been a straight line journey. It's not a journey that will ever end. But realizing that the process and actions, matter just as much as the intentions.
I really like that, because you're absolutely right. There's a people aspect, and any of us that are in a relationship-based type of industry, that's really critical. And yet we lose it. We try to scale and it starts to deteriorate and lose that a little bit. So I love that you brought that to the surface, and that you're intentional and that you're really focused on trying to build that. And you do have to have a plan. So I love that. Great work. Great work. All right. Question number 2. How can leaders help to foster an environment of creativity within their team or company?
It's interesting because in a lot of ways, pressure and stress and a lack of psychological safety are the enemies of creativity. Psychological safety, the ability to be yourself and share what's truly going on, in your work world when you're at work. Google's done some work on that, and we've talked about that a lot within, our organization, over the past decade plus. That's a really hard thing to create in fact, you don't create it at all. It's a hard thing to cultivate within an organization, because truth, like raw truth, is not native to the employment experience. We joke that the employment process is based on a lot of lies in a lot of cases, and not necessarily overt lies, but the resume and the job description, both sides of the interview conversation, there's an agenda. I need to get my point across, not I need to share the reality of things. And so it very naturally leads itself to culture where creativity is stifled by nervousness and am I doing the right thing and how do I toe the line, and a culture void of psychological safety. So the thing that we talk about with psychological safety a lot is that it's not about just inviting everybody to bring all of their own personal issues and problems and become a counseling operation within the company. It's about really two things. Number one is, do I understand how my employees feel about themselves? Do I have access to understand what they think that they're good at, what they're recognizing they need to improve on? Oftentimes people, most of the time I've learned, our employees know what they're not good at. They know where they're falling behind, but a lot of them are trying to show that they're capable of those things rather than connecting on and collaborating on how to get better at those things. So if we know how they truly think about themselves, and then we flip it around and also make sure that they understand how we truly feel about them in a very authentic way, constructive but direct, then that's a recipe for someone feeling that they know where they stand in the they're not coming into work or leaving work with all these questions in their head. Am I enough, or am I doing the right things? Even when you're sharing with them the things that they may not be doing effectively, but you're doing it in the same structure where you're telling where you're looking at where the strengths are, and looking at it comprehensively. That's what frees up the creative process for a lot of people. They look at it and say, oh, I can think outside the box. I can make decisions. I can, I have room and space and confidence because it hasn't been stripped away by, just the tiptoeing, or the posturing that often happens within the workplace.
Great comments. Boy, I cannot agree more, because psychological safety, in my view, is a great promoter of creativity. You have to have
It's
that.
funny.
They're not going to share it.
And it's so true. It's also so hard. It's that thing where that's the nature components of all of it that, are just like, all right, no matter how hard we try at this, there are always things that stand in our way. But what I've seen over time is the organizations that make a concerted effort, they benefit so much from competitive advantage. It's not about being perfect. It's about being intentional about it.
Oh, great comments. Yeah, it's real easy to forget that there is no specific formula that's going to work for every environment. It just isn't. You have to deal with people. You have to deal with a different culture, whatever it is. There's lots of different factors, but great comments. Boy, I could spend all day talking about just psychological safety, but great comments about how that can help build up creativity. All right, question number 3. How can a leader help the team members or the employees to trust each other?
So I'm gonna say something that a lot of people don't agree with me on. I think core values are overrated. And what I mean by that is, if you take a traditional view of core values, you can start to see some inconsistencies. So let's take kind of an easy mark. Trust. Trust is a core value. When, as a leader, when someone comes to you and says, well, I trust this, or I see this, and someone else says, well, actually, this is what happened. You can't live into that core value both ways immediately, because who do you trust, and how does that actually play out? So fostering trust between, and engagement between, team members, for me, is less than, hey, let's have these core values. We've actually set out and said, we need to have agreements together. And we have what we call citizenship, which is, our list of agreements that we all live by, at work. And when we have that list of core agreements, everybody's working from the same playbook. They're doing different things, very different personalities, but they're able to not just, they have the lateral freedom then to build relationships and trust with each other without fracturing, from the leadership dynamic, throughout the chain of command or the hierarchy. And that's one of the things that we see most, is that sometimes people will very easily create trust between team members, but at the expense of the organization, because they connect on things that are fun to talk about or gossip or things like that. And those relationships are never going to go away. We don't want them to go away. But if a lot of our foundation can be rooted in that citizenship, agreements, actions that we agree on, that's what we've translated our core values into, is that, action statements, on those things that just give a better foundation for authentic relationship between team members.
I like that a lot. And I like that you've kind of redefined what you're going to call core values into something more, hey, let's agree on these things and how we're going to act. I think that's a great approach. Love that. All right. Peter, question number 4. Obviously, there are times in anyone's life, but especially in the business world, where things don't go quite as planned, and it might be what we call a failure. But is there a time or an experience that you can share where there was a perceived failure, but you turned it into a win?
Yeah. So if I go back to that first question of, what we learned in terms of good intentions not being enough, there's a situation, around that where I thought we had a really strong family, oriented, work dynamic, felt like we were a family. And I think there's been a lot that's come out, about that. A lot of people have experienced the same thing, that family probably isn't the best, example or definition, of those things. Team, people working together for the same purpose, but where accountability, is there. And about 10 years into the business was the most visceral lesson I had in that. And I got an employee or an email from one of our employees about another one of our employees, that 4-letter words, insults, so frustrated. And it took me a minute to realize that the email was accidentally sent to me, and it was supposed to be sent to one of our other team members about me. And so it was that thing where I realized there was this sub conversation that was going on. And, I was angry, but also very, humble and humiliated, in some ways, that the family dynamic, actually, maybe it was pretty true to a family dynamic if you learn how a lot of families function, but it wasn't true to the dynamic that I thought we had. And so that was one of the visceral pieces where I looked at it and said, all right, this, even though I believe the person's wrong, they have these views about me, we have to get to the bottom of this. And so the best thing I did was not fly off the handle and, terminate the employee, or, we dug into it, and it was painful. But it was also a strong area of recognition for the rest of the team too, to say like, oh, if these things aren't said in the right format, in the right way, they do bubble up and they boil over, and we just had no idea at that point. So that set us down the course of recognizing that that it's those intentions. It's not necessarily about being family. It's about being on a mission together, being team oriented, aligning out, on what accountability looks like, and following through for people, and still truly caring about them, but doing it in a way that's more methodical.
Great comments. Again, I appreciate all your comments so far today. And boy, it's I can't even imagine. My stomach turned when you said you found out it was about you. But I love the fact that you stayed calm and that you kind of had to, let's address it. You didn't run away from it, because conflict is going to exist. And sometimes, to use your phrasing and your analogy about the family, sometimes siblings fight, it just happens, but the love doesn't go away, it's just kind of the way it is. But it's unfortunate that it was targeted to you and that it came to you accidentally. But at the same time, it's fortunate that you were able to handle it the way that you did. So hats off and congratulations to you for handling it the way you did. That would be hard for a lot of people.
And I'll say that it also, if I look back, there's another lesson that's in there, and it's that when I didn't immediately react, because it was one of the first times I recognized that my reaction was actually paled in comparison to his realization that it was sent to me. like that shock for him was far more impactful than if I were to yell at him. I think he actually told me later he would have felt better if I had just yelled at him. But
Live with it for a little while.
but the repercussions of the situation oftentimes share impact more than an individual leader can, and sometimes we layer that on. So we look at it and say, oh, you messed up, but I need to tell you over and over and over. I need to be loud about it. I need to to beat it in. Whereas that's not typically the way self-aware people process things. And so really anchoring on what is going to move the needle and change the situation, not just what's going to make me feel better in this situation, was big.
Oh yeah, I can only imagine. Well, thank you for sharing that story and for being a little bit open and vulnerable there for a little bit. So that's helpful. It's a good example. All right, our last question, Peter. Tell us a little bit about your first job.
So my first job was 14. I baked cookies for a local cookie bakery that my neighbor owned,
Wow.
which was a lot of fun because I would go in the summers. I ride my bike over at 7 a.m, start eating cookie dough. But by the time I was done with my shift at noon, I was sick, and it was a great job to have as a 14-and-a-half-year-old when I could start working in Colorado. My first job that led to this was actually my second actual job. I was 16. And I got a job with an outsourced IT provider. And I had a friend that worked there, and they called me up and said, hey, do we might be interested in bringing you on. My friend knew that I knew some things about computers. And I thought they thought I was a prodigy, and they hired me. Turns out I'd worked for $6 an hour, and so the margins were pretty good for them. And they were real cautious of me doing any actual work until I found out, until they found out how I had built relationships with all these customers. Like I would basically just go be a seat filler. Like, hey, someone needs to be here. There was no remote service at that point. But just call somebody if anyone has a problem. So they'd come by. There was no ticketing system. It was just come by and say, hey, I have a problem with my computer. And so just call someone every time, and they'll tell you what to do. And over time, I built relationships with people, and I started learning what they were actually experiencing, with their technology and with work. And so that's a lot of what this business has been built out of, is recognizing the context of that. I started solving deeper problems than the IT department had been solving up until that point, because I didn't look at it from just a technical perspective. So that was a fun 16, 17, high school summer job, that set me down this path.
Yeah. Wow, what a great, valuable first job, because you learned the value of relationships. And as you just said, you're continuing that same philosophy through your work today with the company that you're working with and founding, and all of those good things. So, well, this has been great, Peter. Thank you so much for being willing to take a few minutes, share your insights and your wisdom. How can people get a hold of you?
Yeah. So LinkedIn, search me up. There's not a lot of Peter Melbys. And definitely connect with me there. And also email peter@newchartertech.com.
Very good. Thanks so much, everybody. We appreciate you joining us every week, and we look forward to next week when we get to have another opportunity to talk about teams and leadership. Thanks so much.
This is Sean Richards with the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. For more ideas, go to teamengagementpodcast.com. We also invite you to follow or subscribe to our podcast wherever you may be listening or watching. Is your business thriving? Go to tbs-score.com to find out. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great day.